We were camping in Washington a few years ago, not too far from Mount Rainier. It was one of those state-managed campgrounds but way in the back. Still technically public, but quiet enough that it felt isolated. Most of the campers we passed on the way in were already settled in for the weekend. We picked a loop that had more tree cover and a bit more space between sites. Not completely alone, but we didn't want people 10 feet from us either. It was me, my girlfriend at the time, and 2 friends. We drove in separate cars, brought separate tents. The plan was simple. 2 nights, unplug, hike a little, cook meals over the fire, just unwind. I was the one who suggested the place, mostly because I'd been there once as a teenager and remembered it being peaceful. That part didn't change. The tall evergreens still rose like walls around each site, and the quiet was the kind that rang in your ears a little when you stopped talking. We got there in the afternoon and set up fast. The tents went up easy, the picnic table was in decent shape, and there was even a little path behind the fire ring that led out to a creek about 50 yards away. That first day went by fine. We cooked dinner, stayed up late, just hanging out by the fire, listening to the soft rustle of the wind in the canopy overhead. You could hear birds, the occasional far-off crack of something in the woods, probably deer, but nothing that seemed out of place. That night, just before going to sleep, we heard something hit the top of one of the cars. A small knock, like a stick or rock, then a second one. We thought it was maybe a pine cone. That happens in the woods. Trees drop stuff, the wind knocks things loose. But we looked up, and the wind had completely died. The trees weren't moving, not even swaying. We checked the roof. 2 small sticks were up there. Not huge, nothing that would dent the car, but still, they weren't there earlier. We kind of laughed it off. Could have been squirrels. Could have been anything. We were in their space after all. But that noise kept coming back. The next morning, we found more twigs on both cars. A few pine cone fragments, too. That wasn't unusual on its own, but they weren't scattered, they were only on the cars. And there weren't that many trees directly over the parking spot. Most of the branches above were high up and farther out. After breakfast, we spent the day hiking a short trail that looped around the area. It wasn't a hard hike, just a few miles with some slight climbs, but it got us moving and away from camp for a few hours. We saw a couple other people on the trail, said quick hellos. Nothing odd. We were gone most of the day and came back late in the afternoon. That's when things started to get strange. When we got back to camp, more twigs and pine cone bits were scattered across the hoods and roofs of both cars. Enough that you had to brush them off with your hand before you could even see clearly out the windshield. Some of them were still green, like they'd been freshly torn off. And again, they were only on the cars, not around the ground, not covering the picnic table or the tents. Just the cars. I remember standing there, looking up into the trees, trying to spot movement. There was nothing obvious. No big nests, no chatter, no sign of an animal. It was just weirdly quiet. We figured it had to be a squirrel or maybe a bird nesting overhead. That made sense, mostly. I mean, what else would it be? It wasn't like someone had snuck in and thrown stuff while we were gone. Our coolers were untouched. Our gear was still in place. No signs anyone had been near the tents. That night, after it got dark, we were back by the fire, cooking dinner and watching the flames. It was one of those clear nights where the air cools down fast once the sun's gone. The stars came out, and the only sounds were the fire popping and the occasional distant whoop from something in the woods. Could have been an owl. Could have been coyotes. Nothing unusual. Then something hit the car again. Harder this time. It made a hollow thump sound, like a branch or a rock, and echoed in the still air. We froze. Then it happened again. This time louder, like someone had dropped something right on the hood. I stood up and grabbed the flashlight, walked over to the car. I didn't see anything right away, just the shine of the roof and hood under the beam. Then I saw it, a pine cone, full-sized, sitting dead center on the roof, and next to it a freshly broken stick. I swept the beam up into the trees, scanning every limb and branch I could find. Then I caught it, movement, something small but fast, darting along one of the higher branches. A flick of a tail, a flash of fur. It was a squirrel, and it looked pissed. It was sitting up there, barely visible through the needles and shadows, but I could just make out the shape. Bushy tail flicking, little head jerking side to side. It looked like it was watching me, not curious, not scared, just angry. I had this weird feeling in my gut, like we'd parked too close to something it had claimed. I told the others and we laughed, kind of nervously, and joked about getting on the bad side of a squirrel. But deep down, I didn't feel like laughing. The thing was weirdly focused. I've seen plenty of squirrels in my life, and yeah, they'll yell at you, throw things sometimes, maybe chatter from a branch, but this one, it was quiet, intent, like it had a purpose. The rest of the night was fine, mostly. A few more knocks on the car, a couple more pine cones. Eventually it stopped, or we stopped noticing. We went to sleep close to midnight. That's when the real weirdness started. I woke up sometime before dawn. The light outside was faint and blue, barely bright enough to see the shape of the tent roof above me. I didn't wake up because of a dream or anything. It was a sound, something light hitting the ground, repeatedly. Not footsteps, not wind, something dropping. I lay there, still in my sleeping bag, eyes wide open, listening. There it was again. Pat, then another pat, then silence. Then a thud, then silence. It went on like that for a few minutes. Not fast, not loud, just persistent. I unzipped the sleeping bag, moved slowly toward the tent flap, and unzipped it just enough to peek out. It was still too dark to see much, but I could make out the shape of the car through the trees. Then another pine cone hit the roof, rolled off the side. I shined the flashlight up into the branches, sweeping slowly, and caught the glint of two small eyes, glowing faintly back at me from above. The squirrel was still there, same spot or close to it. It hadn't moved on. It hadn't given up. It had stayed through the night, waiting for dawn to keep throwing things at the same two cars. I stared up at it, and for the longest time it didn't move. It just sat there, still as a stone, watching. The next morning we packed up fast. No one slept well, and everyone was ready to call the trip early. We didn't talk much about it. Didn't really need to. The mood had shifted. We all felt it. What started as a relaxing weekend felt like a strange intrusion into something else's space. Before we left, I walked one last lap around the site. I wanted to check the trees. I stepped carefully through the brush and angled myself to look up into the limbs above the parking area. That's when I saw it. A mess of small broken branches, clumps of fur, bits of torn bark where the squirrel had clearly made a nest. But more than that, there were piles of pine cones, dozens of them, arranged, not scattered, not chewed or eaten, just stockpiled in a low crook of the tree. It hadn't just been throwing random debris. It was throwing from a specific stash, one it had probably built over time. That car spot, it was directly under its territory. Maybe we parked too close. Maybe it was guarding food. Or maybe it just really didn't want us there. I looked up again one last time. The squirrel was gone. No movement, just silence and trees. We drove out of that site and didn't stop until we hit the highway. Looking back, nothing about it was supernatural, nothing out of this world. But the longer I think about it, the stranger it feels. We laughed it off at the time, a pissed-off squirrel throwing pine cones, but it had kept at it for over a day. It waited through the night. It ignored food. It ignored the fire, the noise, the lights. It had a goal, and we just happened to park in the wrong spot. Now, whenever I camp, I always check the trees. I look for those nests, those piles, and I never park right underneath them anymore, because you never know which squirrel you're messing with. It was about 25 years ago now, maybe a little more, but I remember it better than some things that happened last week. Some memories just dig in and stay with you like splinters, especially the ones that happen in the woods. We were camping in Cowlitz County, Washington, not in a marked campground or some paid site with other families around. This was the kind of trip where we parked off a Forest Service road, hiked in a couple hundred yards, and made our own little clearing among the trees. That's how my dad liked it. Off-grid, quiet, no one around but us and whatever animals lived nearby. There were 4 of us. Me, my dad, my uncle, and my cousin. All guys, We had done a few of these trips before, but this was probably the most remote one. The others were sometimes within walking distance of a trailhead or at least had another camp within earshot. This one felt different even during the day. There was no distant sound of other people, no aircraft, no road hum. It was just forest and silence. The spot we chose was a shallow flat space tucked behind a thin stand of pines, a bit of a natural hollow in the land, with the slope climbing up to the north and thick brush enclosing it on 3 sides. Not a perfect place, but it was hidden, sheltered from the wind, and far enough away from everything that it felt like a real break from life. The first night was uneventful. We pitched our tents, made a fire, cooked canned stew and hot dogs over the flames, and told stories. My dad and uncle drank a couple of beers and passed around a bottle of something stronger once the stars came out. I remember lying back against a log and watching the trees sway overhead, the firelight bouncing off their trunks like they were alive and moving in slow motion. That second night is where everything changed. We'd gone out earlier that day to try some light fishing in a creek we'd found down the hill. The water was fast but clear, and while we didn't catch much, it kept us out of camp most of the day. By the time we got back, the sun was dipping behind the tree line. We built the fire back up, pulled out food, and settled into our usual evening routine. Everything was normal at first. The fire popped and snapped as it caught the bigger logs, and the smells of dinner hung in the air. We talked and laughed, but I started to feel a little on edge and couldn't say why. My cousin mentioned he kept hearing something moving in the brush, but none of us paid much attention. It's the woods. Everything makes noise eventually. The first rock hit the fire around 8:30, right after dark. It was small, no bigger than a walnut, just enough to land in the flames and send a tiny spray of sparks into the air. We all stopped talking for a second and glanced at each other, but there was no follow-up, so we chalked it up to something rolling off the hillside. 15 minutes later, another one came in, this time from the opposite side. Same size, same effect, nothing serious, but just enough to get our attention. We stood up and looked into the dark, shining flashlights into the brush beyond our tents and tarps. Nothing, just black tree trunks, pale branches, and the silver reflection of bark. We didn't see anything moving. No eyes, no sounds, just cold air and trees. My dad, being the practical type, figured it was probably an animal, maybe a raccoon, tossing stuff around or stepping on loose rocks. He wasn't concerned, and neither was my uncle. But I couldn't shake that feeling. Something felt wrong. Like the woods had gone a little too still. More rocks came later, maybe 3 or 4 total. None big, none threatening, but they were all aimed at the fire and always from a different angle. Every time we checked, there was nothing there. We even walked out a few times, scanning with the flashlight beams, trying to catch whatever was doing it. We saw nothing, not even deer. Eventually it stopped. The forest went back to normal, or at least quieter. We sat around for a while longer, but none of us were really relaxed anymore. Even my dad stopped drinking. We went to bed early that night, well before midnight. I've always been a light sleeper, and so is my dad. You grow up spending time in the woods, and you don't let yourself sleep too deeply. It's a survival thing. You always keep one ear tuned for snapping twigs or odd sounds. Around 5 a.m., I woke up suddenly. No noise, no dream, just a strong sense that something had changed. I lay there under my sleeping bag, my heart already ticking faster than it should have. I didn't move at first. I just listened, and then I heard it, footsteps, slow, crunching lightly on the dried needles and leaves outside our tent. Not the skittering of a raccoon or the shuffling weight of a deer. These were deliberate, 2 feet, walking, and then came the smell. I still can't describe it perfectly. It wasn't just a bad smell, it was wrong. Like wet fur, body odor, and rot all mixed together. Thick and sour. The kind of stink that clings to your nose and settles in the back of your throat. I heard my dad stir in his sleeping bag. He was awake too. I knew he smelled it. I could feel him holding still, just like I was. The footsteps stopped right outside the tent. For a moment, all I could hear was my own breathing. Shallow, tight. Then my dad moved suddenly, not up, not out. but he slapped the inside wall of the tent hard, twice. The canvas snapped loud in the stillness. That thing, whatever it was, ran off. Heavy steps thudded into the brush, snapping branches, kicking up leaves, crashing through the undergrowth. It was big, fast. It didn't grunt or growl or cry out, just ran. And the smell started to fade with it. We didn't sleep after that. Neither did my uncle or cousin, who heard the commotion but had no idea what was going on until we told them after sunrise. In the morning, we walked around the perimeter of our camp. There were a few prints in the soft dirt, not deep or clean, but they were there. Not boots, not paws. Something wide, bare, vaguely human-shaped but not quite right. The stride was long, too long for a man unless he was running. But these steps were walking. We didn't talk much while breaking camp. Everyone felt off, jumpy. The air was still heavy with something we couldn't name. No one said it out loud, but we all agreed without saying it. We were done with that place. We hiked out quickly, quicker than usual. No stopping for pictures or breaks. My dad kept his hunting knife out the entire time. He never does that. And he kept checking behind us every few hundred feet, even though nothing was following. I never went back to that area of Cowlitz County. None of US did. My dad passed away a few years ago, and we talked about that trip more than once over the years. We never came up with a good explanation. We knew what animals sound like in the woods. We knew how deer move. We knew what bears smell like. That wasn't any of those things. It was walking. It was watching. It threw things at the fire and came back just before dawn, as if it was waiting for us to let our guard down. Some people say we probably ran into a big predator, maybe a bear with mange or a big cat with some kind of illness. But predators don't throw rocks at fires, and they don't walk upright in slow, deliberate steps. To this day, I've never been more unsettled in the woods than I was that night. It wasn't fear like panic. It was fear like recognition, like part of me understood that something else was out there, something that wasn't supposed to be. I still camp. I still hike. I still enjoy being out in the wild. But I never forget that smell, or the red eyes I saw that second night when I shined my flashlight into the trees. They were high up, too high for a deer, too far apart for a cougar, and they didn't blink. I've never seen anything like that again, and I hope I never do. I rented a car once, not for anything fancy, just needed something cheap to get me and my younger brother upstate for a couple of days. I had this idea in my head that we could camp out behind the property my mom lives on. It's rural enough that you can hear coyotes at night, and her backyard stretches out into woods that connect with some of the neighboring properties. I wouldn't call it the middle of nowhere, but it's far enough from town that there's no cell service once you're a few miles past the main road. The rental company gave me an old Kia Forte, probably the worst car to take off-road, but at the time, it didn't feel like a big deal. The roads up there aren't paved past a certain point, but they're not rough either, just dirt tracks that meander through the trees and fields. I figured as long as I took it slow, it would be fine. The plan was to stay for a weekend, just me and my brother. No real agenda. We'd load up a tent, some food, a couple chairs, and park somewhere behind Mom's lot, where the woods opened into a clearing. He was 19 at the time, and I think he just wanted to get away from people. I kind of did too. We got in around the late afternoon on a Friday. I remember how warm it was, early September, but the heat still clung to the trees and the grass. The wind barely moved. The dirt under our shoes had that dry crunch to it, like it hadn't rained in weeks. We unloaded the gear from the back seat, hiked a little bit through the backyard, and found a spot that looked flat enough to set up camp. It was a quiet place. No trails, no foot traffic, not even signs that anyone had been back there for a while. The grass was high and yellow in some patches, and thorn bushes curled around some of the tree trunks. We got the tent set up before dark, built a small fire pit out of some rocks we found, and cooked hot dogs on skewers. The stars came out fast once the sun dipped. There were no streetlights, and the darkness was thick, the kind that makes you squint for shapes in the shadows. We stayed up late, just sitting around the fire, talking, staring into the woods. Every once in a while, we'd hear something crack, a twig or some dry underbrush, and our heads would snap around, thinking maybe a deer or coyote was nearby. That's normal though. That's just what happens in the woods. You hear stuff. Most of the time, it's nothing. But that night, I had trouble sleeping. I think it was around 2:30 or 3 in the morning. I was lying there, eyes open, staring at the roof of the tent, trying not to let the sounds outside get in my head. I could hear the wind brushing against the fabric, and somewhere in the distance, maybe 100 yards out, there was a faint noise, like dry leaves being stepped on. Not crunched all at once, like a person or a heavy animal. Just here and there. Soft. Careful. I figured it was probably a deer. I turned over and eventually drifted off. The next morning, nothing seemed out of place. No prints near the tent. No shredded food bags. The sun was already heating everything up, and the trees looked golden with the light coming through. We spent most of the day hiking through the area behind Mom's place. It was bigger than I remembered. The woods twisted into little paths that didn't lead anywhere. Old fencing with bent posts. Rusted barbed wire wrapped in vines. At one point, we came across a torn-up couch that looked like someone had dumped it decades ago. Nothing spooky, just abandoned junk from who knows when. We went back to camp late in the afternoon, sweaty and scratched from thorns. I pulled out a bottle of water, sat in the shade, and looked over the area. Felt weirdly quiet. I remember thinking that, like the birds weren't chirping as much. No buzzing flies, no squirrels running up trees. That evening, we started a new fire. The wood cracked loud in the stillness. I stared at the flames, trying not to let my thoughts get to me. It was too calm, too still. You start to feel your own heartbeat louder than the world around you. After dark, we sat out for a while, but I was already feeling off. Not scared exactly, just watched. Every time I turned toward the trees, I half expected to see something standing there. We crawled into the tent just before midnight. I zipped the flap shut and tried to sleep, but again, it didn't come easy. I couldn't get that feeling out of my head, like something was moving just beyond what I could hear. I finally drifted off but woke up around 3 again. Same time as the night before. This time I was sure I heard something. Not leaves, not a breeze, something heavier, a shuffle, a footstep. It was close. I held my breath. I didn't move. I lay there, eyes wide, staring at the fabric of the tent wall, waiting for a shadow or noise, for something, anything, but it stopped. Whatever it was didn't stay long. I eventually got up, grabbed the flashlight and peeked outside. Nothing, just trees, grass, and darkness. I didn't sleep after that. I just sat there with the light in my hand until the sky turned pale blue. By the time morning came, I told my brother I wanted to take a drive, just to check out the roads near the back of the property, maybe loop around toward town. He didn't care much. He just wanted to do something besides sit around. So we packed up some snacks, tossed them in the car, and set off down the rough dirt road that curves behind Mom's backyard. I remembered this path from when I was younger. It twists through some private lots and eventually hits an old logging road. Technically not public, but nobody really checks. I figured we'd just creep along slow in the Kia, check out the scenery, maybe look for deer. The car wasn't built for it. The undercarriage scraped more than once. I winced every time we went over a rut or rock, but I kept going. We passed a few old trailers, nobody outside. Just rundown buildings half sunk into the trees. Windows black with dirt. Overgrown paths. Eventually, the road curved sharply to the right. I turned slowly, the headlights swinging wide across the trees. And that's when I saw them. Dozens of them, low to the ground, reflecting sharp white-blue in the beams. They didn't blink. First I froze. My foot hovered over the brake, but my brain wasn't sure what I was seeing. My brother tensed in the seat beside me, both of us staring forward like statues. It took a second to register. It was a herd of deer. Big ones. Maybe 20, maybe more. They stood just at the edge of the clearing, right in front of the car, clustered together like they'd been waiting for something. Their eyes were locked on us. I don't know what it was. Some primal part of me, maybe. But my heart kicked into high gear. My palms went sweaty. Something about the way they just stood there. Not moving, not running, just staring. It didn't feel right. Then I panicked and hit the gas. The car jerked forward fast, way too fast for a dirt road. I didn't even mean to go that hard, but it jolted my foot down and suddenly we were barreling toward the herd. They scattered. All at once, the whole group launched in different directions. Some toward the trees, some across the road. Their hooves pounded the dirt like thunder. I swerved without thinking, nearly clipped one of them. It darted in front of the car and vanished into the brush. We skidded sideways, tires sliding on loose gravel, and I managed to bring the car to a shaky stop. Dust flew up around us. The road ahead was empty now. I looked over at my brother. He was pale, eyes wide. Neither of us said anything, just sat there breathing hard, waiting for our hearts to slow down. Eventually, I turned the car around. We drove back in silence. Slow, careful. That should have been the end of it. Just a freak moment, right? A weird, sudden run-in with a herd of deer. But it didn't feel like that. Something about how they were standing there, watching, waiting. Back at the tent, we decided not to stay the third night. We broke camp that afternoon, packed everything up, and headed to Mom's place for the evening instead. Her house felt safer. Solid walls, locked doors. That night, I looked out her kitchen window toward the woods. I stood there for a long time, and I swear, just before I turned away, I saw two glowing dots, low to the ground, at the edge of the trees, not moving, just watching. I didn't sleep much after that. A week later, after I'd returned the rental and gotten back to my apartment, I did some reading. I wanted to know how many deer typically travel together. Most sources said a dozen, maybe more during certain times of year, but 24? That seemed odd. There were also stories, quiet ones, not official, just message boards, forums. People who'd seen weird animal behavior deep in the woods. Clusters of deer that didn't move, that stared too long, that seemed off. I don't know what we saw that night, and I'm not saying it was anything unnatural. Just deer probably, maybe startled, maybe confused by the headlights. But I've been camping a lot. I've seen how animals run when they're startled. That wasn't it. Something held them there, and I haven't been back since. Not to that property, not to those woods. Some things don't need answers. They just need distance. I should have known something was off when I got out of the car and couldn't hear anything but the wind. The campsite wasn't even that remote. It was a small turnoff from an old logging road, somewhere east of Cle in Washington state. I'd found it online. One of those dispersed camping areas people post about in forums and comment threads, like some whispered secret for folks looking to get away from the crowds. It was supposed to have a nice view of the hills, some shade, and a soft pine needle forest floor for tents. That part was true, but something about it felt off the moment I stepped out. The wind was blowing gently, but the trees stood almost too still. No birds. No rustling leaves. Even the squirrels and chipmunks weren't around. The sun was starting to go down behind the hills, the light turning gold and slicing through the trees in slanted beams. I remember standing there for a minute, alone, with the smell of pine sap and dry bark in the air, thinking how quiet it was. I chalked it up to being tired from the drive. The whole reason I came out here was to get away for a weekend. Work had been chewing me up, and I'd just gotten over a head cold that knocked me on my ass for days. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, just wanted a few days off-grid to reset, sit by the fire, maybe do a short hike. I had a tent, a sleeping pad, freeze-dried meals, water jugs, bear spray, even a solar battery charger. I wasn't new to camping. I wasn't careless, but none of that mattered in the end. I set up the tent before dark, just off the dirt loop where the campsite circled back. There were a few empty fire rings, but no one else was there. Not a single car had driven past since I arrived. I didn't think much of it at the time, just figured it was an off weekend or maybe people didn't want to risk fire season. There'd been a few small burns that week in other parts of the state. After dinner, one of those awful tasting beef stroganoff packs. I sat on a log watching the last of the light drain from the sky. The crickets started eventually, but it felt delayed, like the forest had been waiting for something. I didn't have cell service, but I kept checking anyway, walking around the edges of the camp and holding my phone in the air like that would help. Still nothing. I turned in early. I remember checking my watch just after 9:30. The tent was warm from the day's heat, and I unzipped the rainfly to let in some air. I lay there, listening to the breeze push through the tops of the trees. After a while, I started to doze off. I woke up maybe an hour later, freezing. The temperature had dropped hard. I zipped the fly back up, tucked myself tighter into the sleeping bag, and lay still. That's when I first heard it. It wasn't an animal sound, exactly. It was more like something heavy brushing against a tree. Not close, maybe 30 or 40 feet off into the woods. It was faint, almost like a dragging sound or the kind of thud you get when a branch falls and hits something on the way down. I sat up, held my breath, and waited. Nothing else followed it. I tried to tell myself it was just the wind knocking down a loose branch or some big animal, elk maybe, moving through. I lay back down, but I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing little cracks, soft thumps, distant rustling. Too rhythmic to be the wind. Too spread out to be just one thing. My brain started spinning out, thinking about animals, weird people in the woods, accidents. I told myself I was overthinking, that I was alone and anxious, that it was all in my head. But I didn't fall asleep again until well after midnight. I woke up just after dawn, stiff and tired. I crawled out of the tent and stretched. There were marks in the dirt near the tree line. Not tracks exactly, but scuffing, like something had dragged a stick or a rock along the ground. I walked over and stared at them for a long time, then looked up into the trees. Nothing. I backed away and made coffee, trying to shake the feeling in my gut. The day passed slow. I went for a short walk in the late morning, followed a deer trail for about half a mile before turning back. I couldn't focus. My eyes kept darting into the trees, ears tuned for any crack or sound. But the forest stayed quiet. That same heavy kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're not alone, even when you can't see or hear anything around you. When I got back to camp, I saw the first real sign that something was wrong. The tent had been unzipped. Not all the way, just a few inches. But I know I zipped it fully. I always do. It's a habit. Bugs, animals, whatever. I walked straight up to it and crouched down, staring at the flap. The zipper had been pulled just a bit down and to the side, like someone had tried to peek in. I stood up, looked around the camp, and called out. No answer. Not that I expected one. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to pack up and leave right then. But I kept telling myself there was no proof. Maybe I'd left it like that by accident. Maybe it was just wind. I kept trying to convince myself that I was being paranoid, that I was tired, that none of this was abnormal. But the tension was starting to build. The kind that sits in your chest and makes your thoughts race. I didn't leave, though. I should have. That night, I built the fire higher. The air had gotten cooler again, and clouds were moving in. I sat facing the woods, eating jerky and watching the shadows stretch longer and darker. Every now and then, I'd hear a sound, something stepping on a dry branch or brushing against bark. But I never saw anything. I kept the bear spray in my coat pocket and had a long knife next to my chair. I didn't know what I thought I'd use it for. When it got fully dark, I didn't go to bed. I stayed up, just sitting there, letting the fire burn low. Around midnight, I thought I saw something move between the trees. Not a person, not clearly, just a dark shape, like someone ducking between trunks. Didn't make any noise. I stood up, holding the flashlight, and pointed it toward where I thought it was. The beam hit tree after tree, empty trunks, branches, needles. Nothing there. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the tent with the zipper shut tight and the flashlight on, listening to everything. Every scrape, every shift in the breeze, every snap of a branch. Just listening. I must have nodded off at some point because I woke up when the sun was already up. The fire had burned out, and the world outside looked normal again. Like none of it had happened. But it had. There were new marks in the dirt. A long drag line leading from the back of my tent into the woods. I followed it for maybe 30 feet before it vanished into the pine needles. No prints. No sign of anything taken. Just a long, strange drag in the soil. That was the final straw. I packed everything in 20 minutes, shoved it all into the back of the car, didn't even bother rolling the tent right. I just wanted to be gone. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing between the trees, just watching. But there was nothing, just the same silence. The car started fine. The road out was rough, but I didn't stop. I kept my eyes on the mirrors. I didn't feel safe until I was back on the main highway, speeding past other cars, back in range of cell towers and gas stations. I didn't feel fully safe until I was in my driveway that night. I never found out who it was, or what they were doing. There was no one else officially registered to be out there, and I never saw another car or camper. It wasn't an animal. I've seen bear tracks, cougar marks, elk trails. This was different, and I know I didn't imagine it. I still think about the scuffs, the dragged dirt, the zipper pulled back, just slightly open. It's been months since that trip, but I still check my locks twice every night. I still wake up sometimes at 3 or 4 a.m., heart pounding, like something's watching me through the window. I haven't gone camping since. I don't even walk in the woods alone anymore. And now, against my better judgment, I'm back in Washington again. Different spot. Another break, another weekend to reset. I thought enough time had passed that I could do it right this time. I picked a well-used campground, not dispersed. There are other people nearby, kids riding bikes, families lighting fires, laughing. I can see their tents through the trees, but that tension in my chest hasn't gone away. I just walked back from the restroom. It's dusk again. The breeze feels the same. The light is doing that same slanted thing through the trees. And I swear I saw something again, just for a split second, move between the trunks across from my sight. So yeah, that's where I am now. So thank you. I still think back to that trip and wonder where exactly it went wrong. Everything seemed normal at first. It was a short solo camping trip, nothing out of the ordinary. Just 3 nights out in the woods to clear my head and get some quiet. I drove east into the Cascades, far enough to be alone but close enough to cell signal that I wasn't totally cut off if something went wrong. I found a spot along a Forest Service road I had used a year earlier. I remembered it because of a downed tree that had been cut just enough to drive around. That was still there. The clearing I had in mind was maybe 100 feet off the gravel road, flat and shaded by tall pine and fir trees. A ring of stones formed a fire pit, and there was an old log dragged near it that made a decent bench. I pulled in around 2 in the afternoon. It was late summer, warm and dry, that time of year when the dirt puffs into dust under your boots. I got out of the car, stretched, and just stood there for a second, breathing. It was quiet. I didn't hear anything but wind in the trees. No cars in the distance. No people. I started setting up camp. My tent was one of those dome-style 2-person setups, just enough room to sleep in and stash a few things. I had a bit of trouble with the poles. One of them bent awkwardly and then collapsed when I tried to stand it up. I ended up kneeling in the dust, half inside the thing, arms twisted and tangled trying to fix it. After I finally got it upright, I stepped back and snapped a photo of the wreckage. Tent lopsided, the fly hanging off one side like a melted sheet, and me standing there with my shirt soaked in sweat and dirt smudged across my cheek. I sent it to a buddy of mine. His reply came almost instantly. Okay. Picturing that in my head is fucking hilarious. I laughed. It actually helped settle me a bit. That kind of moment makes you feel like things are normal, like you're just some guy trying to camp and messing it up in a funny, human way. The rest of the setup went fine. I laid out my sleeping pad and bag, got my water jugs in the shade, made a little wood pile. I had brought a small hatchet and a folding saw, so I went looking for fallen branches to cut up. The woods were dry, but not dangerous dry. There'd been no fire bans posted. As the sun dropped, the light came in long and gold through the trees. I cooked a freeze-dried meal over my little stove, some kind of pasta that tasted like wet cardboard, and sat on the log near the fire ring eating while mosquitoes buzzed lazily around my head. The first night passed quiet. I didn't start a fire, mostly because I was too tired and didn't feel like babysitting flames. I got in the tent around 9 and just lay there listening to the forest. A few sounds now and then, branches falling somewhere far off, the snap of dry needles under small animal feet, but nothing that felt out of place. The second day was when things started to feel a little strange. I woke up around 6 a.m. and unzipped the tent to cool air and soft light coming through the trees. I walked a short loop near the site, following a game trail that went down to a shallow gully. There was an old dry creek bed there, full of round stones and weeds. I didn't see any large tracks, just squirrels, birds, maybe a rabbit. When I got back to camp, I noticed something small but odd. The folding saw I'd used the day before was lying on the ground behind the log. I was sure I had set it on the cooler. I'm not careless with sharp things. I didn't think much of it, just picked it up, brushed off the dirt, and put it back. Later that afternoon, while collecting more wood, I found something else. A small piece of red cloth snagged on a branch. It was torn and faded, maybe the size of a sock. No footprints, no campsite nearby, no tire tracks, just this little shred of fabric, fluttering on a low branch like it had been there for days. I looked around the area for a bit, but didn't see anything else. No signs someone had been camping, no wrappers or gear, nothing. I threw the cloth in the trash bag I kept tied to the tree and went back to camp. By sundown, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I started a small fire, more for comfort than heat. I kept it low, just enough to give a glow around the site. I sat there with my boots off, resting, eyes darting to the shadows outside the ring of light every now and then. Around 11 p.m., I crawled into the tent, zipped it up tight, and lay there listening again. I woke up maybe 2 hours later, not to a sound, but to the absence of sound. The forest had gone completely silent. No crickets, no wind,
No rustling.
nothing. It was like the world had been muted. I held my breath, thinking maybe I was imagining it. Then I heard something, a low, steady crunch of dry pine needles. Footsteps, not heavy, not fast, just slow and careful, like someone was trying not to be heard, but couldn't help it. They circled around the edge of the site, not close to the tent, more like 15, maybe 20 feet away. The steps would go for a few seconds, then stop. Wait, then a few more. My heart was hammering. I had bear spray in the tent, next to my headlamp and knife. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe for a bit. Eventually, the steps faded. I didn't hear anything else for the rest of the night. I didn't sleep either. When dawn came, I stepped outside and checked the ground around the tent. There were scuffs in the needles. Not clear footprints, just patches where the layer had been disturbed, like someone had walked in soft shoes or socks. I looked out into the trees. Nothing moved.
No tents. No smoke.
No sign of anyone. I packed everything into the car except the tent and a few basics. I told myself I'd stay one more night, but deep down, I knew I'd leave if anything else felt wrong. That evening, just before dark, I sat on the log again. I didn't start a fire. I wanted the dark. I wanted my eyes adjusted, just in case. It was quiet again, but not like the night before. This time, the wind was moving a little, the branches swaying softly. The usual night noises came back. Frogs in the distance, a few insects buzzing. Then I heard it again. Crunch, crunch, stop. It was back. This time, I stood up slowly and stepped behind the tent. Knife in one hand, headlamp off. The footsteps were closer, 15 feet, maybe less. I held my breath and waited. Nothing. Then I caught it just for a second, a silhouette. A human shape moving between two trees. No flashlight, no pack. Just a dark figure gliding behind the trunks. I didn't say anything. I didn't move. I just watched as the figure passed behind another tree and didn't come out the other side. I waited 20 minutes, barely shifting. Nothing moved again. That was it. I grabbed the gear I'd left out and tossed it all into the car. I didn't fold the tent. I didn't clean up. I just left. I drove fast, headlights bouncing on the ruts in the dirt road, dust swirling in the mirrors. When I hit the main road, I didn't stop until I was an hour out. I pulled into a gas station and sat in the car with the engine running, hands gripping the wheel. I don't know who it was, or why they were there. I don't know if they had been watching me since the first night or just stumbled on my camp later. All I know is that they didn't want to be seen. and that they were close. Too close. I never reported it. What would I say? That someone walked near my tent? That I saw a shape in the woods? There was no proof, no threat made, no property damaged. Just small things, odd things. But I'll never forget how quiet the forest got. How those steps came and went without reason. How someone circled my tent while I lay frozen inside. And now, whenever I think back to that first text, okay, picturing that in my head is fucking hilarious. I don't laugh anymore, because when I close my eyes and picture it now, it's not funny at all. I've been hiking for most of my adult life. It started as something small, just little weekend walks on dirt trails near my apartment when I lived outside Denver. Nothing serious, just a way to stretch my legs and feel like I was part of the real world instead of glued to a screen or hunched over a desk. But like most things that stick, it grew. Over the years, the hikes got longer, the packs heavier, the maps more vague, and the trails less traveled. I never really aimed to be some backcountry expert or whatever label people throw around. I just liked the feeling of being deep in the woods. I liked how the air changed the farther you got from the road. How the trees stopped looking like decoration and started feeling like walls closing in on something older and untouched. It's not something you get walking in the city. It's not even something you get on popular trails. You have to go a little further, just past the last cairn, past the cleared campsites. That's where the woods start to feel real. That's what led me to a place I hadn't been before, Southern Oregon. I'd been through parts of it before, driving or passing through on the edge of a work trip, but I'd never stopped to hike. That changed after a friend of mine moved to Medford. He told me about this area on the edge of a national forest that wasn't really managed like a park. No ranger station, no visitor center, barely even a trailhead. Just a gravel pullout on a Forest Service road, a faded sign with a bunch of shotgun holes in it, and a few worn tracks leading into the trees. That's exactly my kind of place. So I planned a solo trip, 3 days out, 2 nights. Nothing crazy, just enough to really disappear for a bit. I packed lean but careful. Lightweight tent, down bag, water purifier, bear canister, dry food, my stove, and a Glock 20 I always carry in lion or bear country. Again, I don't carry it because I want to use it. I carry it because things go wrong in the woods in ways you don't always get a second chance to fix. I parked at the pullout mid-morning. There was one other truck there, but it was empty, dusty, looked like it had been sitting a while. Probably a hunter or a long-distance hiker off-trail. I didn't give it much thought. I locked up, slung my pack, and started walking. The trail was barely marked. A faint path through ferns and leaf litter that twisted gently into thicker forest. After about 2 miles, it widened out and followed a narrow ridgeline that dropped off steeply on both sides. The kind of spot where every step feels like a tightrope, even if it's only a few feet wide. The views were good up there. Long stretches of pine forest, distant hills rolling in every direction like waves. But what I really liked was the silence. No traffic, no aircraft overhead, just birds, wind, and sometimes the groan of old trees swaying against each other. The deeper I got, the more I noticed how untouched it felt. No wrappers, no footprints, no signs anyone had been out there in a long time, just pure wild. I hiked about 10 miles the first day, cutting west off the main ridge trail and following a dry wash until I found a flat spot near a bend in a seasonal creek. It was mostly dry, just a trickle of water moving across smooth rocks, but it was enough to filter for drinking. I set up camp there, boiled some water, ate a pouch of rice and beans, and sat on a boulder until the sun dipped below the trees. Night came fast and cold, like it always does in the woods. I zipped into my bag early and drifted off listening to the wind scrape across the branches above me. No weird feelings, no strange sounds, just a clean, quiet night in the backcountry. The second day started like any other hike. Slow stretches of trail broken up by short climbs, with the air warming up as the sun got higher. I had a vague loop planned, something that would bring me back to the main ridgeline by evening. Most of the morning was uneventful. I saw some deer tracks, a few turkey scratches in the leaves, even heard an owl still calling from a dense cedar grove after the sun was fully up. Normal stuff, It wasn't until I came around a narrow switchback about 3 miles past camp that things got strange. I was moving slowly, like I always do when I'm in dense forest. Deliberate steps, eyes ahead and to the side, ears open. The trail dipped through a patch of young pines and curved sharply to the left. As I rounded the bend, I saw it. At first, I didn't register what I was looking at. It was just color and shape. Tan, gray, and deep red all mixed together in a heap near a fallen log about 15 yards off the trail. Then my brain caught up. It was a deer, dead, fresh, laid on its side with its neck at an angle that wasn't natural. Blood pooled beneath it, soaking the pine needles. The stomach had been opened, ribs cracked wide. Parts of it were missing, chunks of meat stripped clean from its flanks. Steam was still rising off the carcass in the morning air, and crouched beside it, low, still, and silent, was a mountain lion. I don't know how I didn't see it first. Maybe it was the way the light came through the trees, or how perfectly it blended into the ground. But the moment my eyes hit it, everything in my body froze. It wasn't looking at me. It was focused on the deer, paws braced, shoulders hunched forward. I must have caught it mid-feed. I didn't move, didn't breathe. My heart slammed once, twice, then settled into that tight, humming thump that only fear can bring out of you. I stared at the cat, waiting for it to react, waiting for it to notice me. Then it did. Its head snapped up. Its eyes locked onto mine instantly. No hesitation, no confusion, just full, alert attention. I felt my lungs stop. My knees wobbled a little under the weight of adrenaline. I thought about reaching for the pistol, but I didn't move. We stared at each other for maybe 3 seconds. Then, without a sound, no growl, no grunt, not even the snap of a twig, the mountain lion turned and ran. It didn't bolt in the way you'd expect. No flailing, no thrashing. It moved like a shadow sliding across the forest floor. Smooth, fluid. It turned away from the carcass, bounded once over a downed tree, and was gone. Just like that. The whole thing felt like watching a video with the sound turned off. I'd never seen anything move so fast, so big, and so quietly. It was like watching a movie on mute, something your brain can't fully accept as real. I stood there a while after it disappeared, still not breathing right. My body felt like it had gone hollow, like I was floating above myself. The deer was still there, blood soaking into the ground, steam still curling off its side. It looked like something out of a nature documentary, except I was standing in it. I backed away slowly, eyes scanning the trees. I knew the cat had probably run far off. That's what they do when spooked. But I also knew cats don't always leave forever. They double back. They wait. They watch. I didn't want to be watched. I turned and hiked back the way I came, fast but not frantic. Every 10 steps I looked behind me. Every shadow looked wrong. Every snapped twig felt like a signal. The hike back to camp felt longer than it should have. I kept listening for movement in the brush, kept expecting to see that tan shape again. I didn't. When I got back to camp, I packed up everything. I hadn't planned to hike all the way out that day, but I didn't feel like staying another night. The idea of sleeping out there with a fresh kill less than 3 miles away didn't sit right with me. That lion had worked hard for that deer. It would come back for it. I didn't want to be anywhere near that place when it did. I hiked until my legs burned, got back to the trailhead around dusk. My truck was still the only one there. I got in, locked the doors, and just sat for a few minutes. Let my heart settle. Tried to process what happened. I've thought about that day a lot since then. People think the scariest part of the woods is getting lost or falling or running into a bear. But those things are loud. They happen fast. You know when they start and you know when they end. What scared me wasn't that the mountain lion was there. It was how quiet it was, how close it let me get, how completely it vanished. That silence, that total, absolute silence, has stayed with me more than anything else. It reminded me that I'm not at the top of the food chain out there. Not even close. The woods don't care how much gear you have or how many hikes you've done or how calm you think you are. They belong to something else. Something older, something quieter. And if that lion had wanted to hurt me, I wouldn't have even seen it coming. I wouldn't have heard a thing. I still hike, still go deep, still solo sometimes. But I watch more carefully now. I read the ground. I notice the birds. And I never forget that what's quiet isn't always gone. Sometimes it's just waiting. I've never liked Arizona's heat, but there's something about the desert that draws you in anyway. It's dry and quiet in a way that feels like the whole land is holding its breath. My mom always said that stillness could mean two things: peace or danger. You never really know which one until it's too late. A few years ago, I took a trip out to Tucson with my girlfriend at the time and a couple friends. We were all in our late 20s trying to escape work and the noise of the city. One of my friends, Nick, had this idea to camp around Sabino Canyon. I didn't know much about the area beyond that it was a big natural reserve northeast of the city, full of trails, washes, and saguaro cacti that looked like frozen dancers at sunset. He showed me a few pictures and I figured, why not? We packed light but brought enough to be out for 2 nights. The first day went well, long drive, basic hike in, beautiful views. We camped just far enough off the main trail that we wouldn't see people, but not so far that we felt completely cut off. We made a small fire that first night, cooked sausages and cracked some beers open while bats flitted over us in the dark sky. It was the kind of night that makes you forget your phone exists.
No busing.
No schedules. The next morning, things started to feel a little off. Nothing major, just weird. It was quiet even for the desert. I woke up sweating in the tent around 6 a.m., the sun already high and hot. The others were still sleeping. I figured I'd walk a bit, get a better look at the canyon walls before the day really baked us alive. There's a narrow dirt trail that winds behind the bigger wash that cuts through Sabino. I followed it for maybe a mile, alone, watching the way the sun turned everything orange and gold. I didn't bring much, just a water bottle, my phone, and a folding knife. I don't usually carry one, but after a couple of backcountry trips where I'd felt weirdly exposed, I started slipping one in my pocket. About 20 minutes into my walk, I started noticing signs of human activity. Footprints that didn't belong to any of us, small cigarette butts pressed into the sand, the corner of a blue granola bar wrapper half buried under a rock. I figured it was leftover trash from hikers, which pissed me off but didn't surprise me. Then I came across a sock. It was gray and filthy, crumpled on a boulder like it had been peeled off in a rush. It wasn't a hiker's sock. It looked like something from a laundry basket. Thick, almost wool-like, with a hole at the heel. Not something you'd want to wear in a 100-degree canyon. That's when I started hearing footsteps. Not behind me, not exactly in front either, just out of sight, somewhere in the brush to the left of the trail. At first I thought it might have been a javelina or a deer, but the steps weren't erratic. They were steady, human. I stopped walking. The sound stopped too. For a few seconds I just stood there, scanning the ocotillo stalks and mesquite trees. I didn't see anyone. I started walking again, deliberately now, quieter. The sound picked up again too, like someone pacing me maybe 50 feet away, hidden behind the thick shrubs. I told myself it was just another hiker, someone out here alone like me. I wasn't doing anything wrong. It was public land, technically. Still, it felt wrong. You know that feeling when you know someone is watching you, even though you haven't seen them yet? That low coil in your stomach that gets tighter and tighter? I picked up the pace. The trail looped slightly up a small hill and curved around a sharp bend of rock, creating a little saddle. When I rounded that turn, I looked back out of instinct, and that's when I saw him. A man, stark naked, pale as hell, skin almost bluish against the red dirt. He wasn't running or yelling. He wasn't even making eye contact. He was just walking, like he belonged there, completely bare. His face was twisted up like he was angry or in pain, brows tight, jaw clenched. His hands swung a little too wide at his sides like he was flexing or trying to shake something off his arms. I froze for a second, heart slamming against my chest. I don't scare easily, but something about how normal he acted made it so much worse. He didn't care that I was there, didn't look ashamed or surprised. Felt like I was the intruder. I took a few steps back, my legs suddenly cold and stiff. The man kept walking right across the trail through a patch of prickly pear, and into a thicker thicket of desert brush. He moved like he knew exactly where he was going. I couldn't see any shoes. His feet must have been torn to hell from the cactus spines and sharp rock, but he didn't flinch once. I turned around and practically jogged back to camp. I don't know what I expected, to be chased, to be confronted, but no sound followed me, just my own footsteps and the crunch of gravel under my soles. When I got back, Nick was making coffee over the little camp stove, and the girls were sitting on a log, groggy and sunburned. I didn't say anything at first. I didn't want to sound crazy, and part of me honestly thought I'd imagined it. Like maybe the heat had gotten to me. Dehydration can do weird things. Later that afternoon, I casually asked about the area, trying not to sound shaken. I told them I thought I saw a guy walking off trail and joked about how maybe we'd set up too close to someone's private land. That's when my girlfriend, Kayla, looked up and said, "Isn't there a nudist place around here?" I laughed at first, thinking she was kidding. But then she got serious and said she remembered reading something about a small naturist colony not far from the canyon, somewhere tucked in one of the smaller valleys nearby. Apparently, they weren't technically breaking any laws as long as they stayed off public trails. I didn't say anything, but my stomach dropped. We stayed the second night, but I barely slept. Every time I heard a twig snap or a rustle of dry leaves, I pictured that man's face again. Tight, angry, not like he was mad at me, but like something had worked itself into his brain and wouldn't let go. The next morning, I was up before anyone else again. I walked maybe 10 feet from the tent to piss and noticed something strange. Our fire ring had been disturbed. Not just the logs, but the ashes. They were scattered, like someone had been sifting through them. We hadn't touched it since the night before. No wind, no rain, and not even animals usually bother with ash. Then I saw it. Another sock. Gray, hole at the heel, sitting on the edge of the fire ring, like someone had placed it there. I didn't tell the others. I packed my gear fast and told them I wasn't feeling great and needed to head back to the car early. They followed without much argument. I think the heat and lack of sleep had gotten to them too. The hike out was quiet, tense. We never went camping together again after that trip. Not because of some big falling out, but because no one seemed eager to bring it up again. It was like a collective silence fell over all of us. Whatever I saw, whatever left that sock, we all knew something had been off about that weekend, even if we never put words to it. A few months later, I got curious and actually looked it up. There is a nudist area not too far from Sabino Canyon. Private land, mostly quiet, with people who like their privacy and don't take kindly to outsiders. But here's the thing that stuck with me. I found a forum post from a guy who used to hike near that area. He said he once saw a man, completely nude, walking in circles near the wash, mumbling to himself, dragging a stick in the dirt like he was tracing something. The post ended with a warning. Don't go off trail near the East Ridge. Some folks out there aren't playing with a full deck. I never hiked there again. I don't think the man I saw wanted to hurt me, but something was wrong with him. Not just in the obvious way. He didn't look like someone out for a naked walk. He looked like someone trying to get away from something that had already followed him too far. And the worst part? That sock he left behind. I still have no idea how it got to our fire ring.